The Uglies movie does not do the book justice. When I tell you that they somehow missed almost every single point, I am not being dramatic. Written by Scott Westerfeld in 2005, Uglies is set in a future where everyone is considered ugly until they undergo extreme surgery at 16. This should be a story about inner depth, yet the movie is entirely surface level, which is so ironic. It is the very thing they are trying to warn us about. And I don't know how this happened. Uglies is a fairly easy read. We are not adapting Dune over here. As a longtime fan of the books myself, I was so excited for this movie and I'm so clearly disappointed. Allow me to explain to you just how much potential they wasted here. I genuinely believe that this book deserved so much better. I will be spoiling everything from the major themes to the characters, but I want to first start with the most fundamental flaw, the shallow world building. There are two aspects of the world that are adapted poorly, the city and the surgery. The city is split between two sides, Uglyville, where kids before the age of 16 live, and New Pretty Town, where the post-op pretties live. The difference between the two sides, I think, is actually fairly represented in the movie. I quite like the way Pretty Town looks, and you can see which side has more fun. But what isn't seen is the extreme environmentalism. All that's explained in the movie is that the people of the past, known as Rusties, which is essentially our present day, they almost killed the planet with their reliance on oil. Now they use renewable energy via an engineered flower. But this is also destroying the planet. The city just covers it up. They, for some reason, leave out the true intentions of the city because this is the opposite of what they stand for. In the book, this city is a zero-waste, highly efficient, anti-consumeristic society. Even the excess in Pretty Town is recycled. They live in confined cities not because of a toxic flower, but so they don't harm nature. In fact, these flowers are supposed to emphasize their environmentalism, not erase it. In the book, the orchids are not a toxic energy source, but a re-engineered rare flower that became a superweed. The pretties have to burn them to protect the environment. But in the movie, the flowers frame the city as environmentally unconscious. They are quite literally killing the planet. So why does this even matter? This city is meant to be morally gray, and the city's environmental stance is meant to be contrasted by the smoke. The smoke is a secret, illegal village outside the city where no one gets surgery. In the book, your first impression of them is that they're living harmoniously in nature, but you learn that they do cut down trees to scavenge for metal. It's a really subtle scene that implies the smoke is flawed. But in the movie, it's the smoke that burns the city's toxic flowers, which means the smoke is protecting the environment, not the city. And there is nothing to suggest that they are harming nature for greed. By not establishing the good environmentalism of the city and the bad environmentalism of the smoke, the movie has so much less nuance when it comes to good and evil, and we're gonna unpack this more as we go throughout the different characters. Another poorly adapted feature of the city is their technology. The way this movie is, you would think the hoverboards, talking rooms, and interface rings are simply signs that this is set in the future. But in the book, this technology mimics freedom. You can fly, change how you look, materialize a cupcake, but its true purpose is surveillance. The hoverboards and rings have trackers, and the room needs to be tricked when an ugly sneaks out. It's supposed to reflect the need for society or parents to track teenagers versus the teenagers' need to grow on their own. While the movie does show these gadgets, they don't frame them with any deeper meaning, which is such a shame because technology and tracking kids is way more relevant today than it was in 2005. And there's an even deeper level to this surveillance, but we're gonna come back to that at the end. To the city, the other half of preserving the planet is fixing humanity's conflict problems. Their solution was the Pretty procedure, which is a mandatory full-body surgery everyone receives at 16. If everyone is pretty, no one is angry, and no one suffers discrimination. The irony is that until uglies reach the age of 16, they're still disadvantaged, and the pretties are privileged. I think the movie does an okay job of showing that Tally, who is awaiting her procedure, wants to be pretty. She judges herself in a mirror, makes a morpho, and looks longingly at Pretty Town. But they completely remove the depth from why. They only focus on Tally's desire to not feel left out. The pretties get to have fun, and her best friend Paris just turned pretty, and she has to wait 3 more months. But isolation is just one reason. Not touching on the others weakens the major themes of the book. This problem arises because they don't define what ugly and pretty mean in this society, which is crucial to understand this whole story. In the movie, becoming pretty is framed as becoming your best self. But this is surface level. Becoming pretty isn't simply achieving an ideal. This society and Tally believes that only surgery makes you biologically attractive. That means that everyone, no matter what they look like, believes they are ugly upon birth. Not establishing this extreme belief is problematic for 2 reasons. 1, it lowers Tally's stakes. She's supposed to believe that if she doesn't get this surgery, not only will she be left out, but she'll be alone. She can never find love if she's not attractive. The second reason is it is incredibly confusing for the audience when someone like this calls themselves ugly. In fact, I've seen so many people criticize the casting choices for being too attractive, which just shows how unclear the world building is. The uglies represent how much culture impacts our view of beauty. Casting conventionally attractive people is actually necessary to show how powerful their brainwashing is. We can see that they're attractive, but their society tells them that they aren't. How many of the flaws that we see are because of our society's influence? Attractive people aren't the problem here, the writing is. That said, I would agree that there are too many hot actors, because uglies are supposed to represent the average teenager, which includes a variety of different looks. There's a scene in the book where Tally finds an old magazine with models and celebrities of our time, so people we would find at the peak of beauty, but Tally finds them repulsive. We needed a simple example like that to explain how all of these people view themselves. In contrast to the uglies, the pretties reflect how biology impacts our view of beauty, only it's pushed to the extreme. You wouldn't know that from the movie though because of how unextreme they look. The pretty procedure is supposed to be based on what evolutionary science deems desirable. The result is symmetry and clear skin to indicate health, innocent features like big lips and eyes to indicate youth and harmlessness, and fit bodies to indicate fertility. These physical attributes are based on very real studies of what humans actually find biologically attractive. But when you force putting all of that together, it isn't natural at all. The pretties are supposed to have an uncanny valley appearance to us. Think of it as an overly photoshopped person in real life. The author actually has a lot of his own blog posts from like 2007 on this sort of uncanny valley beauty concept. But in the movie, the pretties are simply a regular person with an Instagram filter and contact lenses. I've heard a lot of people say that this movie would have been better suited to animation, and in some ways, I kind of agree with that because it is kind of difficult to wrap your head around what a pretty looks like if our models are considered so ugly to them. But I do think that live action is more powerful because this whole movie is about our view of human beauty, and it's easier to connect with a human actor than an animated character. But let me know what you think. I'd be curious to know how you would have approached the visuals of the pretties. One thing I will say though is I really did enjoy the vapid performances of Paris and Shay. Their acting sold the transformation the most for me. Because the pretties represent evolutionary science, there should be a huge scientific undertone around this procedure. But there's only one mention about humans preferring biological symmetry. That's just not enough to reflect the scientific versus cultural beauty theme that is arguably the biggest theme in this whole book. This is easily fixable by including heavy science jargon, numbers, and data imagery when Tally's getting her measurements done or making her morpho. This would make beauty seem objective to this society. Without it, it just seems like this procedure makes a conventional beauty, not a biological, evolutionary beauty. Plus, given that they think only surgery makes you attractive, it makes no sense to imply a romance between Tally and Paris before surgery. Tally, especially at the beginning, is supposed to believe that they are programmed to like one type of beauty, the surgery. Yet here Paris is complimenting her eyes and she's blushing. This addition defeats the purpose of her real love interest, David. David lives in the smoke and recruits uglies to show them another way of living. In the movie, Tally meets David and likes him immediately, as seen by watching him bathe, which highlights his non-surgical physical attractiveness, the very thing Tally is brainwashed to find ugly. She should not be eyeing him up here. In the book, Tally is not attracted to David when they first meet. He has a scar on his face, calloused hands, and he's an ugly older than 16, which is something she's never seen before, and she thinks it's grotesque. Only after they spend time together, bond, and share trust does she realize she has feelings for him. This leads to a revelation. Despite David's physical flaws, Tally is attracted to him. David is supposed to shatter her belief about science. Beauty is subjective. Liking someone isn't just about what they look like. We also aren't programmed to like one type of beauty, but we never see any of this reflection. David is never framed as going from unattractive to attractive in Tally's eyes. David also has no personality. He quite literally lacks the inner beauty Tally is supposed to fall for. David also falls for Tally for no reason. We get this line, which is also in the book, by the way, where he says, "The way you think makes you beautiful." But it's meaningless. We don't know what she thinks. I don't really know anything about Tally in this movie. What is her inner beauty? Their relationship is so surface level that it defeats the entire theme of the book, which is what beauty means. Aside from beauty, there's one other theme this surgery represents, or at least is supposed to represent. In the movie, we learn that everyone turns pretty at 16. Tally is awaiting her 16th birthday. There are also graduation ceremonies, which, by the way, make no sense at all. Do they have these every single day for every birthday in the year? I'm really not sure. But at least we can infer that becoming pretty is a rite of passage. But the deeper meaning of this detail stops here. Tally is supposed to believe that becoming pretty is synonymous with growing up. One reason this point is missed is because the transformation isn't severe enough. This isn't simply shaving down a nose, it's physically turning a child into a young adult. Pre-operation, the uglies are normal teenagers, so they should have emphasized acne and frizzy hair, under eye circles, to show their humanity and awkwardness, then make the pretties appear mature in comparison. And another reason this concept is missed is because they leave out a key scene in the book. Tally's fight with Shay. Shay becomes Tally's friend after Paris turns pretty. They bond over having the same birthday, feeling isolated, and their love of tricks, which is essentially this world's version of rebelling. But unlike Tally, Shay doesn't want to be pretty. She wants to run away to the smoke. In both movies, she does do this, but her reasoning is different. In the movie, Shay leaves on her own accord because she doesn't want to, quote, stop growing like she thinks the pretties do. This is the one reference we get to the growing up theme, but it's sort of an afterthought because we never hear about it again. In the book, Shay only decides to leave after Tally tells her to, quote, grow up in a fight. What Tally means is Shay should turn pretty. In her head, uglies rebel because they're unhappy and immature. The pretties never rebel because they're happy, therefore mature. But Shay thinks pretties don't rebel because they're mindless. When Tally tells her to grow up, Shay interprets this not that she should turn pretty, but that she should make her own choices on her own terms. It's Tally's words that motivate her to leave. Including their fight would have established Tally's mindset on maturity and pretty. Then, through her journey of mistakes and experiences, she would have learned what growing up really means. But more importantly, since Tally doesn't motivate Shay to leave, she is significantly less responsible for potentially putting her in danger. So when the specials confront Tally for information regarding Shay's whereabouts, her decision to help or not is nowhere near as personal. Speaking of which, let's talk about these specials. There are so many illogical changes from the book. First of all, I had no idea if Dr. Cable was a pretty or a special. She looks like a pretty, but she's supposed to be a special. After all, she works for Special Circumstances, which is an authority of this world. I think we later find out that she's a cured pretty, but it's such a disappointing change from the lore. The specials and Dr. Cable are supposed to be a terrifying beauty. They look like predators, the biological top of the food chain, which makes sense because the specials represent the city and the science part of the book. Whenever Tally describes seeing a special, she uses the words cold and sharp. I always imagined the specials with the same essence as the White Witch from Narnia, people with very sharp bone structure, and speak with a severe undertone of superiority. I love Laverne Cox, but I don't think she had her heart in this at all. I don't think it's all her fault though, because they also left out a lot of examples of her cruelty. Like when she holds up a mirror to Tally and tells her she's gonna be ugly forever, but instead we get a speech with a Beyonce fan blowing in her hair. Special Circumstances is also supposed to be a discreet organization, so much so that most people think they're a myth. The pretties have fun without really understanding the world around them. Not in the movies though. The specials are giving daily appearances. This significantly lessens the tension and mystery surrounding them. Meeting Dr. Cable in the books is Tally's first break in her worldview that there are secrets about her city that she doesn't even know. But since we're introduced to Dr. Cable in the beginning, this reveal isn't shocking or as intriguing. In the movie as well, the specials are some vague, mindless, evil experiment rather than a carefully crafted authority to keep the city in line. Along with lessening their moral complexity by erasing their care for the environment, they're also just less interesting in general. I'm gonna come back to the specials because there's a lot more that I want to unpack with them, but before we do that, I want to first talk about what actually happens in this scene, because Tally's decision here is so surface level in comparison to the book. Since Shay has run away, Dr. Cable wants Tally to find her, and she tells Tally that Shay is in danger because David has brainwashed her. In the movie, Cable proceeds to tell her that the smoke is developing a weapon, and Tally must become one of the Smokies to find it. This is not in the book, and it doesn't need to be here either. But this isn't even the main problem. The main problem is the choice Cable gives Tally. She tells her that she can either turn pretty or save Shay and the world. Tally chooses to help. And when I tell you that this erases her entire growth, I mean it. In the book, Cable gives Tally a different choice. She can either find Shay or stay ugly forever. Tally chooses to help, not to save her friend, but so that she won't stay ugly. Tally is supposed to be shallow. And of course she is, because she's raised to believe that being pretty is all that matters. Tally's decision should be driven by selfishness, not selflessness. Her decision here is also illogical because Tally wants to be pretty more than anything. She could easily choose to be with Paris, her oldest friend, over Shay. At no point did they establish that Tally cares about the greater society. Why is finding a weapon her problem? It's like they wanted to make her a hero without understanding that Tally has to grow to become a hero. On the topic of friends, the relationships Tally has in the movie are, again, way too surface level. This is my theme throughout the video, if you couldn't tell. For example, Paris is supposed to be Tally's anchor to becoming pretty, and Shay is the anchor to the opposite. Tally's loyalty to each person should reflect her changing belief system. For Paris, the movie tries to establish their childhood bond, but it's really not that strong. It should be devastating when he turns pretty and removes their shared scar. I probably would have built their relationship up from the beginning instead of starting with this exposition info dump, but at least they sort of get their relationship right at this point. In both versions, Paris makes Tally promise she won't cause any more trouble so that she doesn't risk her surgery. But Tally also promises Shay not to tell anyone about the smoke. Tally confides in Paris about whether to help Cable and turn Shay in. She eventually sides with Paris. If she helps, she can join him like she promised and become pretty, which is what she believes she's supposed to do. Tally is still loyal to Paris even though he removed their scar and they barely talk anymore. It shows how much she values becoming pretty. I don't think that point is really translated to the screen, but at least they have the conversation. Because then the movie takes a wild U-turn from the book and Paris becomes a mindless special. Turning Paris into a heartless villain defeats his purpose. He's no longer waiting for Tally in Pretty Town, so when she decides to abandon the procedure, like she later does, she isn't also abandoning a friend. Her decision has a lot less impact. When Paris is defeated, and he's likely not dead, I truly didn't have any emotion, and neither does Tally because we never see her grieve her best friend of 4 years at any point. Then there's Shay. Like Paris, I don't believe their friendship either. They leave out some pretty key moments of trust building and instead focus only on hoverboarding. Which, if you don't have a big budget, this is the first thing you cut, not character development. Although I do appreciate that they put the hoverboarding in here because that is a really fun part of the book. The biggest problem I have with Shay though is simplifying Tally's betrayal to her. When Tally eventually chooses Shay and the smoke over the city, she burns her spy necklace, but it alerts the specials, and they invade the next day. Shay feels betrayed, but the details are different in each version. In the movie, when Tally arrives to the smoke as a spy, Shay immediately calls her out for coming for the wrong reasons, but she thinks that time will convince Tally that she'll like it. In the book, Shay blindly believes that Tally wants to be there because she trusts her. When the specials invade, Shay figures out on her own that Tally sent them, and this is a much bigger betrayal because Shay trusted Tally from day one. She doesn't have the doubt that movie Shay has. The second betrayal the movie lacks is Shay's crush on David, and thinking that Tally steals him from her. Instead, they play up a connection between Tally and Shay. I don't mind that Tally and Shay have a thing, but I still kind of wish she liked David, because removing Shay's crush on David decreases the severity of how Shay feels towards Tally at the end. On top of those two things, she betrays Shay a third time. She's essentially the reason Shay unwillingly turns pretty. All of these factors make Tally's guilt so strong, and it's a huge reason why she makes a selfless decision at the end, which we're gonna get to in a second. On the topic of Tally's shallowness, she's also supposed to be a liar. She likes the attention she gets from sharing her journey, given that she's the first one to make it alone. Her lies eventually catch up with her and feed Croy's suspicions. But by the time the specials invade, she's gained Croy's trust, which is opposite to Shay, and he helps her escape. And this makes her feel even worse because she's gained the trust of somebody through lying. This guilt is another reason she makes a selfless choice. Then there's her relationship with David. The secrets he shares with Tally are supposed to be massive signs of trust, like telling her he was born in the smoke and introducing her to his parents. Instead, he says the former in passing, and there's hardly any weight around the latter. Learning that Tally was a spy is so excruciating that he doesn't even reconcile with her by the end of the book. Tally also indirectly kills his father, and in the movie, he trusts her the next day, which is wild. David's dad's death is also a poor stray from the books. In the movie, he dies of a form of random punishment, but in the books, he dies from a non-consensual brain experiment. The importance of bodily consent hits home for Tally, and this also factors in to her decision. But I want to focus on the scene with David's parents first. When Tally meets them, she learns the truth about the procedure. The essence of this conversation in the movie is accurate. Tally learns that the city doesn't just make you pretty, they alter your brain. Non-consensual brain lesions force people into a false sense of happiness and compliance. David's parents, who were doctors, ran away and began secretly working on a cure. So now we circle back to the whole problem with the evil in this movie. In the movie, Dr. Cable is framed as a no-nuance villain. She believes people's freedom of choice should be taken away because humanity, quote, needs to be led. And by led, she means by her. I guess her motivation is just because she's on a power trip. She also says humanity will destroy the planet without her system, but this makes no sense because she already is destroying the planet with her toxic flowers. The real Dr. Cable believes their system is good because it keeps humanity in equilibrium with the environment and with each other. And the crazy thing is she's right. This system, the way it's written in the books, works. The environment is healthier and peace does exist. The only problem is they had to give people non-consensual brain damage to do it. And obviously that is completely wrong to do, but the intent isn't necessarily bad. The thing is the smoke is genuinely a threat to the peace they've cultivated. Without the procedure, humans will revert back to their rusty ways and destroy the planet again. And these are things that, at least in the book, we already see the smoke starting to do by cutting down trees. But because the smoke is 100% good, they never harm the environment, there's no commentary on human nature at all, and whether we're naturally destructive. The movie Dr. Cable has no moral ambiguity. She is way less interesting and nowhere near as complex. In the book too, the other side of the city's good intentions is supposed to be their lies, specifically about science, as we've discussed throughout this whole video. In the book, Tally learns the real reason for the Rust-eze collapse. It actually wasn't because of oil, but a scientifically engineered disease that targeted their oil. The city covers this part of history up, partly because they want to hide the possible bad outcomes of human science. Plus, the evolutionary science I've been talking about this whole time is a lie. Yes, humans can be biologically attracted to certain traits, but the city painted beauty as this objective scientific fact when that's just not the case at all. The city manipulates the facts so that their science is always good and right, and people can't form their own opinions because they aren't provided with all the different sides. In the movie, the city does manipulate the truth about the surgery and, I guess, these flowers, but we don't ever learn that they've erased history for their own gain. I think the more interesting point that is lost, though, is that even if you are provided with a different side, you don't always make the right choice. In the book, when Tally is forced to go to the smoke, she is revolted that they would cut down trees and wear leather jackets. But Tally eventually cuts down trees too. After all, it does make it easier to get the metal she wants. It shows that she's impressionable, and it's easy to justify something when it serves you. But we never see her change in this way or make any questionable choices. In the movie, she's perfect. And on that note, I don't know why they framed the smoke as a rebellion, because they aren't one. Their only goal is to let people experience a different way of living and give them a choice, before simply conforming to what the society expects of them. The smoke doesn't stop people from having the procedure. They let people go all of the time, and they will only test the cure that they're working on pretties who consent. Which finally leads me to Tally's decision to volunteer as a test subject. In the book, Tally's decision to turn pretty is finally a selfless one. She doesn't want to become pretty anymore because of what they do to her brain, but with all of the chaos that she's personally caused, she figures that this is a chance to make things right. She sacrifices herself for the good of others. As we've already established with Tally, none of this growth is realized in the movie. Tally is selfless from day one. She goes to the smoke in the first place to save the world. We never really see her truly grow up or realize how important it is to make individual decisions. We also never see her actual positive traits. Her greatest strength is her resourcefulness. But again, the movie doesn't really show this. Evading the specials requires almost no wit, and her journey to the smoke happens so fast that you barely see her problem-solving skills. We also find out from Dr. Cable that it's intentionally easy for uglies to sneak around. Yes, there is surveillance that the uglies get around, but there's an even deeper level of surveillance, because the specials want them to develop their brains. Extra tricky uglies, someone like Tally, are actually tracked and recruited for important city jobs and special circumstances. So there's only a few special people who get to the top, but the leaders are all handpicked, so it's totally corrupt. We don't ever learn this in the movie, and while it's not important for this story, it does come into play in the later books, so I would have expected them to at least plant some seeds. There are also a lot of other memorable aspects I would have loved to have seen adapted in the movie, like the endless spag bowl Tally ate on her journey, riding the roller coaster at night, and Tally's conversation with her parents. The most important thing when adapting a book is to translate the core of it. It doesn't need to have every detail, but definitely the most important ones. This book isn't by any means the most masterful book in the world, okay? Really, it was just a huge part of my childhood. I think if you read this book when you were younger, there was something so magical about it. I guess I just don't understand why it was changed so much when the source is already really great. At least with the Hunger Games adaptation, yes, I absolutely believe that the book is 100% better than the movie, but I still like this movie. Like, the point is still there. I think they translate the core of the book to the best of their ability, at least in the first one. The last two, I don't like at all. And the movie for To All the Boys, I haven't read the book, but a lot of you guys said in my comments on my last video that it actually is quite a good adaptation. I wish uglies got the same treatment too. The author, Scott Westerfeld, was an executive producer, but I really wonder how much input he really had in the movie. Let me know what you thought of the movie, even if you liked it. But if you didn't like it, I would also love to hear what you thought. If there's anything that I missed out, there's so much detail in this book that I'm sure I missed so much. I'm gonna go to bed now because this script almost killed me, if I'm being honest. I was up way too late the last 4 or 5 days writing it. So yeah, I'm tired. Have a good night, guys, and thank you so much for watching.